Hello everyone, it's Valkrin. Welcome to my guide video for patch 4.13. Haven't done one of these in a little while, been doing some testing for this new patch, and come up with these results. So we'll start with the nerfs, we'll go into the buffs, then we'll transition into the item changes, and finish up with the summoner spells. We'll start in the jungle, Lee Sin. Before this patch, I honestly would give a lot of advice to my students that you don't want to pick Lee Sin unless you're a good Lee Sin. After these nerfs, now that Lee Sin no longer has an attack speed debuff, Lee Sin has become an even less pick-worthy champion in the jungle. Unless you're a Lee Sin main or you play Lee Sin especially effective, there's not really a whole lot of point in putting time into learning Lee Sin right now. Just, if your goal is to climb, Lee Sin is on the bottom portion of the section of jungle now, if you aren't that great with Lee Sin. If you're really effective Lee Sin, he's still a pretty decent pick, but overall I think there are better choices in the jungle right now. Elise, same boat as Lee Sin. The Elise mains can still find a little bit of success with the champion, but she's been nerfed a lot. Riot's really trying to push Lee Sin and Elise to tier 2, if not a little bit below that. Evelynn, out of the two that we just mentioned so far, Evelynn is actually the least nerfed this patch. Her passive is the main power behind Evelynn. Any jungler would kill to have the ability to bypass wards, and that's exactly what Evelynn has with her passive. So even though they kind of nerfed her damage a little bit, I think that Evelynn is still an amazing jungler. I've seen a lot of Evelynns do well this patch, played one game of Evelynn, she is fantastic still in the right hands. And high elo and low elo. Mid lane, Yasuo. Nerfs Yasuo do hurt him a little bit, but the difference between a good Yasuo and a bad Yasuo is pretty dramatic, right? If you're a bad Yasuo, it's like, it's just not worth it playing that champion. But if you're very skilled with Yasuo, he becomes a terrifying champion. So simply pick him accordingly. Lulu. Well, I mean, Lulu mid and top is still a viable pick. The nerfs to her, they're not going to make that big of a deal. You can still even play Lulu in the role of support. Seen a lot of successful Lulu's top lane this patch still. Haven't seen very many Lulu mids, but she's still a powerful champion in the right hands. Gragas top lane. Ooh boy. So the nerfs to Gragas were actually pretty minor, to be honest. They could have done a lot worse. Still a great champion top lane, still very difficult to lane against, and very easy to win lane as. Transitions mid game into a powerhouse. Great pick, great pick right now. Braum. Butchered his ultimate at level 6, you know, it scales up a little bit, but it's still just not quite the same thing. Nerfed his passive, nerfed some other components of his ability kit. Honestly, Braum is still a good support. Even after all the changes to Braum, he's still extremely tanky, really easy to use, still a pretty solid pick in solo queue. Even if Thresh's Lantern did nothing besides being able to, you know, the click component was still available to it. If it didn't shield anyone at all, the Lantern would still be one of the best non-ultimate abilities in the game. If used correctly, of course. Now that it only shields one other person besides Thresh, I mean, that does hurt Thresh, but it's still... Thresh is still Thresh. He's still that crazy awesome support if you play him correctly. The ultimate change on Thresh, yeah, you're not going to be able to do quite as much damage with Thresh if someone's just berserking through your walls, but Thresh is still Thresh. Great pick in the role of support if played correctly. Nami, hardly any nerfs to Nami, still a well-rounded support, a solid choice if you want to support with sustain and also have the potential to dominate lane. Kog'Maw. Nerfs to the early game, the health, the percentage shred to magic-resistant armor was toned down from 20% to 12%. It is noticeable early game on Kog'Maw, but he's still very powerful mid and late game. Tristana. Early game nerf, late game still the same. Still an awesome pick. Lucian. Of the two other AD carries, or this being the third one nerfed, these were actually pretty significant nerfs to Lucian. Lucian still has the damage, but the E not removing slows is a pretty big deal. This makes any champion with slowing abilities, which there are so many of them, become way more effective at locking down Lucian. He can no longer become that indefinite kiting machine because of the cooldown increase on his E, and also the fact that it no longer removes slows. That's not to say you can't like win games at all with Lucian, it just means he's not that super god tier AD carry. He got weaker. So we're looking at the buffs now. Olaf. The buffs to Olaf help him out a bit, but he still has the same problems. I actually won a game with jungle Olaf, did fairly well, seen some other players play Olaf top jungle, which is some great success. I think that Olaf is getting better, getting towards more pick-worthy. Definitely a viable pick in the jungle this patch. Lux mid lane. Now, what do I have to say about Lux? It's awesome that her passive now has an ability power scaling ratio on it. It's not much, but it helps. The problem with Lux is she's very immobile and she's very susceptible to getting caught out. It's very easy to make mistakes on Lux versus other AP carries mid lane that have a little bit more mobility to deal with. Lux has something I call Lux syndrome because I always compare mid laners when they innately are just squishy and they don't have mobility, they have quote-unquote Lux syndrome because they're like Lux. If you miss your stun or skill shot, you're pretty much cut out to dry. You don't have a whole lot of room to survive around that area. LeBlanc. Now, I don't know. These changes, they help LeBlanc a little bit, but she still has a very low win rate. I see, you know, average LeBlancs do just okay. Like, she's not the same champion she used to be pre-nerfs where she could just duel just about anyone and she was super dominant. Her damage is still there, it's just, she just doesn't feel the same. And if you're great with LeBlanc, then by all means, you can still win games and do well with her, but she's not a champion you want to pick up to learn right now and expect success in solo queue. Kayle. Reverting some of the nerfs to Kayle are going to help Kayle out a bit. I still think Kayle is... Well, last patch, Kayle was still a decent choice. Not like super god tier, but definitely a champion you could pick in solo queue and still win games with. Kayle still has that invulnerability ultimate. Yes, it's a longer cooldown, but I don't think anyone's saying that her ultimate's bad. It's just when someone sees a nerf, they're like, hey, I'm not going to play that champion anymore. And that's not always the case. And Kayle, getting some of these nerfs reverted means that Kayle is becoming more appealing. Vel'Koz. Honestly, the biggest reason why Vel'Koz isn't played is because he's got bad AP ratios. Early game, mid game Vel'Koz is terrifying. You can do a lot of damage with Vel'Koz. But the main problem with Vel'Koz is Vel'Koz has really bad AP ratios. I found a lot of success by playing Vel'Koz support, but Vel'Koz mid lane, it has some problems with the AP ratios. Jax. Really the only thing that was nerfed about Jax the patch ago was his health. And that's a big deal top lane when it's all about those early level duels and whatnot. It has a big impact. But Jax's damage in the late game is still there. In this patch, they made it so his auto attack has a smoother animation, which helps Jax out a lot because he's all about thwacking. The thwack, thwack, thwack. And now that he can do it a little bit faster because the animation's smoothing out, he became, you know, that's like a quality of life buff to Jax. Decent pick. Just don't pick him into really bad matchups because he does have the health issue early game. Lissandra. Lissandra's another AP mid that just doesn't scale the best late game. Really low AP ratios on Lissandra. She relies on the low cooldown and her Q ability to have high DPS output in team fights. She's strong early in mid game, but she still has some issues with her passive, not really feeling like it makes sense with her kit. I mean, yeah, she's got high mana cost, but overall I think they need to do some juggling, maybe reconsider her passive and some other components about Lissandra. But her early and mid game, you can like use that as the dominating factor to pick Lissandra and win lane and, so to speak, win game. But late game, you can definitely feel the fact that her AP ratios are so low. The changes to Sona, I wanted to hate, but they're starting to grow on me. I actually really like the Sona changes now. And I did some checking in Korean Challenger over the last 7 days. Sona, or support Sona, has the highest win rate in Korean Challenger right now. And that doesn't mean a whole lot since it's, you know, so few games up in the last 7 days. But that does mean something. Whether it means that people aren't used to playing against the new Sona, she is powerful. And so consider that, you know, she's probably underrated right now in lower brackets of play, but she's definitely a tremendously powerful pick for bottom lane if used correctly. Janna. Well, these are going to help her. The buffs to Janna's passive and her tornado at full charge doing 0.25 seconds, 0.25 seconds longer on the knockup. Yeah, that's going to help her, but she's still mostly just a counter pick. You don't really go into a game as Janna support and say we're going to dominate lane. That's more of like the role of like a Thresh support or something like that, where you have utility and you have lane dominance. Janna, you're all about the disengage, you're all about protecting your allies, and that can have success in solo queue, But overall, I find that Janna is just a lacking support right now compared to the other pick supports like Thresh and even Nami. So Vayne. Decent changes to Vayne. They help her out. The attack speed per level, her ultimate being changed a little bit in compensation for her tumble, having that bug fixed. Well, if you were a great Vayne player before, this is only going to help you out a tremendous amount. I don't think these changes are enough to say, hey, if you're playing AD carry, you have to learn Vayne. It's just to say, hey, you know, if you're a Vayne main, this is going to help you out even more. Otherwise, there's still some other really great AD carries right now. Graves, ooh, I like Graves, but I don't think he's that great. Graves is fun, but because of his attack range, because a lot of other AD carries just simply scale better than Graves, he's not the best pick in solo queue. However, if you're a big Graves fan and you really enjoy playing him, he did get better. But he still suffers from being short-ranged and being outscaled by a lot of the other popular AD carries right now, like Kog'Maw, Tristana. Sivir. Well, her ultimate can give that initial movement speed for longer duration, rank 2, rank 3 on the ultimate. Pretty decent. I would say Sivir is a good team pick right now. If you have a lot of bruisers on your team, you could, you know, slap Sivir in there. Great for team fighting, but she's still very short-ranged, hard to siege turret, similar to Graves. Decent pick. Varus. I pretty much considered Varus an underrated AD carry for a little while. He's always been in the back of my mind, sort of like Draven, where you consider them pretty powerful, but you don't really see them very often. Now, this patch, Varus' ultimate had the cooldown reduced a little bit, and that's pretty great for Varus. But the main issues with Varus is he doesn't have the best time against mobile assassins, and there are a lot of popularity right now going on between Talon and Akali. So if the enemy team doesn't have something like a Talon or Akali, you might be able to consider Varus, but his lack of mobility really hinders him against assassins. So you need some way to peel for Varus if you pick him, but otherwise, if you can somehow fit him into a team composition, he's an AD carry that brings a lot of crowd control. So definitely an underrated AD carry right now. Item changes. Frostfang, the gold generation went down by 2. You're still going to build it on champions like Morgana and whatnot. Something like Sona, you probably build Spell Thieves half the time. The other half the time you'll work towards Talisman. But overall, you're still going to work towards Frostfang if it's great on your champion, like Morgana support or Zyra support. You can simply just use the charges so effectively, you're still going to build it. So it's not that big of a deal. Yeah, you're going to have less gold to work with, but you're still going to build it if it's good on your support champion. Nomad's Medallion and Talisman getting a little bit of extra movement speed put on it. Talisman has less cooldown reduction, but that's totally fine because there's so much CDR to be had on the support items. If the game reaches mid to late game on support and you start getting multiple items, before you'd probably go way over CDR cap if you went for Talisman anyways. So it's fine. Chalice of Harmony and Banshee Spell. These were 2 magic resist items that were nerfed. Chalice, 5 less magic resist. Pretty big impact considering that this was a core build in most mid laners' itemization. You'd always... It's easy to play Syndra or Ziggs and just get Chalice first item. You're just a spam happy AP carry. And the fact that you're probably still going to build Chalice means that it might make it harder to play against AP assassins mid lane like Fizz and Akali, because playing those Ziggs and Syndras mid lane and the other choices that get this as well, you're just going to naturally have 5 less magic resist with the normal build path, which means the assassins you're going against, the AP assassins or whatnot mid lane, are just going to be able to do a little bit more damage than you're used to. Banshee's Veil, the cooldown being increased on this makes sense. It was kind of a no-brainer for most AD carries to get this in just about every game. Now that it was nerfed, you can still get Banshee's Veil, but Guardian's Angel becomes probably an equal alternative, especially with all the assassins going on right now in solo queue. So Banshee's Veil change really just makes it so Guardians becomes an option. Deathfire Grasp. The Deathfire Grasp change is only 30 seconds increase on the cooldown, but the percentage of it, if you look at the percentage from going from 60 seconds to 90, that's a 50% increase in the cooldown on it. That's a big nerf. Even though it's only 30 seconds, that's the percentage speaks for itself. That's a pretty big nerf. Kind of shows that Riot really disagrees with the playstyle that DFG offers for the game. Playing something like a Veigar mid and Ahri mid, and just being able to add that much extra damage to your kit to 100 to 0 down targets, they're shying away from that. Now that Deathfire Grasp is not available quite as often, it will have a pretty big impact on your solo queue games, because if you're getting fed on Ari, but you're still relying on your DFG to 100 to 0 down targets, it just means you won't be able to 100 to 0 down targets as often, which means you might not get quite as fed when you are snowballing. Riley's Crystal Scepter, not a whole lot to be said about this. The main thing that kind of disappoints me about this item being changed is that when I would build Riley's, I would build it for the passive, but also I would build it for the massive amount of health it would give on an AP item. And now that it gives a little bit less health but more ability power, it just makes me like kind of sad that it changes my view on this item, because it was previously just an item that I would get for the HP mid to late game on most APs, and also utilize the passive. It'd usually be on like a 4th or 5th item on a lot of my certain AP carries anyways, but you know, weird change in Riley's. So exhaust and heal were nerfed. Exhaust 10% damage reduction lowered, but it now gives 10, or it now lowers their armor and magic resist by 10. That's pretty great for early game aggression. Honestly, this is a decent buff to early game aggression, because now it's not only you know, a shutdown modifier, it's also that same ability where it's like, hey, this is the target we're killing at level 2 bottom lane. It has less armor, less magic resist, let's go for this target. It has a lot of extra uses for it now that you can kind of put it on targets that you're burning down. You're also trying to shut down their damage as well. Heal. Now the changes to heal make it, in my opinion, optional to go barrier now. And the situations that would go barrier over heal would be when the enemy team has big assassins, or an assassin that has the potential to get really strong, like Kali, Talon, using those as great examples because they're so popular right now. If they have a Talon or a Kali, or just even a Zed, barrier becomes a better option because it outscales heal. Heal, better option early game for laning phase, but barrier is definitely a better option against assassins mid to late game as a scaling summoner. So I would say it's situational when to take heal or barrier now. Okay guys, thanks for watching. I would have liked to go into more detail on a lot of these champions, and I can do so on my stream. And because I always typically post a video and then stream right after, you can catch my stream right now. And in between games, I answer questions, so if you want me to go into more detail about Olaf and what I think about him right now, you can come on my stream and ask me questions about that. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.